Well, welcome if you're new. My name's Chip Ingram. I'm one of the pastors, and we're a study talking about the very person of, who is Jesus really? It's called Jesus Unfiltered, and the first 5 chapters of this book are about the issue of believe. And nearly every single weekend, there's a weekend now and then this doesn't happen, but just about every weekend, someone's traveling from around the country or someplace other in the Bay Area, and they have been listening to the radio for 3 years or 10 years or 15 years, and they usually come down front, or I meet them in the coffee shop, and they usually say, "Oh, I knew you, I recognized your voice." And then they look at me, and some of them say something, but even when they don't, I know what they're thinking. I've had this conversation, scores of times in the last decade. It goes something like this. "Oh, you don't look anything like you sound." For real. And then someone will be really honest, like, "You're way taller on the radio." I guess you tell basketball stories and make assumptions. Or this is a true story. And a lady sincerely, and you could tell she was deeply disappointed. So for some of you guys that don't have hair, you'll be very encouraged. Literally, she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, I thought you were bald." And I said, "I'm sorry." She goes, "Yeah, just kind of like, I don't know if her husband was bald or, she was a Kojak or Yul Brynner, or she was right about that age that would know those people. And how you like this one? "Oh, you sound so much younger on the radio." You're like, "Who's this old guy talking to me now?" And then I loved it. This one person said, "You know something? When you listen to someone, but you don't see him, you come up with a mental picture in your mind, and that sort of becomes who you think they are, and you take whatever they say, and you put it through the filter or the lens of this mental picture." And what I want to suggest is that we all have a filter or a mental picture of Jesus that we've gotten through life. And even when we read the Bible, when we hear a message, it goes through this mental filter. And the fact of the matter is that I'm really sorry I'm not taller. I'm really sorry I'm not younger. I'm sorry I'm not bald for those people. But personally, I'm kind of glad for who I am, as is my wife. But what if we're doing the very same thing with Jesus that people do with me? Because the fact of the matter is they hear my voice, but they really don't know who I am. If you look on the front of your notes, I want to give you a little quiz. So the lights will come up a little bit. And I want to examine maybe a filter that you and I may have. And so here's the question, and just your first answer. Don't spiritualize this. I'm going to go through a few questions I put together, and I want you to ask and answer which is the easiest for you to picture. You're just trying to mentally picture something in your mind. Which is easier to picture about Jesus? Number 1, Jesus praying or Jesus partying? Jesus looking holy or Jesus laughing loudly? Jesus sipping a cup of tea or Jesus drinking a glass of wine? Jesus frowning at your mistake with his arms crossed or Jesus smiling at you with understanding after you just made a mistake? Jesus calm and reserved or Jesus in an outburst of anger? Of these so far, which are easiest for you to picture in your mind? Finally, Jesus keeping the peace, a religious leader, or Jesus causing a riot, a radical revolutionary? See, I'm going to suggest, without even knowing you, just in the culture that we live in, most of us, with the exception of a few of you, we would go down through and say, on the left side, the thing you said first, I could picture in my mind pretty easily. On the right side, him belly laughing, him really enjoying a glass of wine, him at a party going, "Hey, I got the next dance." Right? He did. He did. He was a radical revolutionary. He started his ministry, as we've already heard, at a humongous party. He laughed loudly. He was funny. He was great to be around. Was he calm? Was he holy? Was he all the rest? Yeah. Here's the deal. Question on the bottom. Could it be that our filters are blinding us to the real Jesus of the Bible? Could it be that you just have unconsciously thought about him in such a way, just like those people unconsciously thought about me? I got news. I'm not that tall. I'm not bald. And I am older. But that's me. And I've got news for you. Jesus laughed deeply. Jesus celebrated life. Jesus was a radical revolutionary. Jesus was strong and bold and courageous. And in a moment of outburst of righteous anger was violent. And that's not the Jesus that we have in the little picture books. So we're going to discover the unfiltered Jesus in John chapter 2. And to do that, we're going to do a little review. Because part of my journey, remember, I long for us to go through the Gospel of John. I long for you to see Jesus for who he is, this authorized biography. But I want you to learn to do this on your own, to study the Bible. So is there anybody here that doesn't have a Bible with you, scriptures? Anybody? Raise your hand. I've got these for you, free. Free. Get that hand up. This is the Gospel of John. We're just going through it. Gospel of John, put up your hand. Ushers will bring you one. If you don't want to raise your hand, there's a Bible in front of you. Yeah, Bible right here, down front, Kimberly. Is that right? Yeah, great. Okay. Now, 3 questions you asked. Do you remember this? When you're going to study the Bible, you always ask 3 questions. What does it say? What does it mean? And what does it mean to me? Do you remember that? Was anybody here last weekend? Okay, right? Observation, what does it say? Interpretation, what does it mean? Application, what's it mean to me? And so what I like to do, let's just start and ask this question. What does John chapter 2, and then write the word say? What does it say? Just what actually does it say? The context is chapter 1 ended. After we heard about his pre-existence and his deity, he recruits 5 disciples. So as chapter 2 opens up, Jesus has just started his ministry. He's recruited 5 of his disciples, and he's traveling, and they're following along with him. As you read the entire chapter, you would see there's 2 very specific sections. Section 1 is Jesus with his 5 disciples go to a wedding feast, and we'll learn about it, and a miracle happens, and it's the first miracle. Section 2, he goes to Jerusalem to the Passover, and where there's first a wedding, then there's a whipping. He takes some cords together, and he drives out money changers. He turns over tables. He is livid with what's happening there. And so what I want us to do is remember, if you're going to do observations, you want to read through it quickly first. So why don't you stand with me? I'm going to be with the Gospel of John. People were all in, we're in different translations, but they're all pretty close. And all we want to do is just get an overview together. And by the way, great reports. I've heard some of you say, I've read John 2 every day. I'm studying it on my own. Way to go. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And Jesus was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, holding about 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it out. And when the master of the feast tasted the water now that it had become wine, and he didn't know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first. And when people have drunk freely, then they serve the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, literally miraculous signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and something happened to the disciples. And his disciples believed in him. And then there's a little segue. After this, he went down to Capernaum, we'll learn became his headquarters, with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Scene number 2. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were there selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and money changers were sitting there. And making a whip out of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers, and he overturned their tables, and he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered what was written. Actually, it's Psalm 69:9. "Zeal for your house will consume you." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for these doings?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you'll raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he'd said this, and they believed, notice, the scriptures and the word that Jesus had spoken. Now, after he clears the temple, notice there's a little sidelight, something he hung around. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw, literally, the signs or miraculous signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them because he knew the people, and he needed no one to bear witness about him, for he himself knew what was in man. Okay, you can be seated. You got the overview? And so once you do the overview, then the next thing you want to do, what does it say? Observation. So let me just go through and quickly make some observations that you with a legal pad or I with a legal pad and an open Bible, I mean, this isn't rocket science. It's not something spiritual. What does it actually say? So let's look and see what it says. What we learned in the wedding section is a host runs out of wine. Jesus' mother requests help. Jesus instructs the servants. The water supernaturally turns to wine. Only the disciples and the servants are aware of the miracle. The miracle is Jesus' very first miracle, and it's called a sign. We'll learn a little bit later. There's 4 different words for a miracle. One is a sign, other is a wonder. There's 2 other Greek words, and they all have a different emphasis. They're saying something supernatural happened, but as we'll learn a little bit later, this supernatural thing happens, but it's not just to turn the water into the wine. It is a pointer. It is a sign. It's communicating a deeper spiritual truth. The disciples see Jesus in a new light, and they believe. Now, we know what? Remember the context. We found the Messiah, so they believe intellectually. They talk with him. He tells them some things. There's 5 of them, and they're walking with him. So they believe at one level. And now they've seen a miracle. Now they're believing it at a deeper level as they're beginning to see his power as well as his words. Make sense? Scene number 2. What can we observe? In the whipping, Jesus goes to the Passover in Jerusalem. By the way, every adult male 19 years and older who lived within 15 miles of Jerusalem was required to attend. Jesus drives out the animals and the money changers. Jesus calls the temple his Father's house. His authority is challenged by the Pharisees and the religious leaders. Jesus performs many miracles. Many people believe on his name, and Jesus knows men's hearts. All I want you to see, if you're going to get the unfiltered Jesus, the real Jesus, not the Jesus that you've created in your mind, not the Jesus that you've heard someone teach or talk about, not the Jesus in a book, not the Jesus in a novel, not the Jesus of your church background, including this one, but the Jesus that is unfiltered, the God that came to earth and lived as a little baby and lived a perfect life, that was born of a virgin, died upon a cross, rose from the dead, who's living and sitting at the right hand of the Father, and who will come again, and who lived on the earth and came, what do we learn? In him was the life, and the life was the light of men. And that he came to his own, but those who were his own rejected him. But to as many as received him, he gives the right to become children of God. And now, in John, we have the real story of the real Jesus, who he really is, why he really came, and now what's that mean to you? So step 1 is you just say, what does it say? But you can't stop there. The second question you need to ask is, what does chapter 2 mean? We're talking about interpretation. I mean, what's it really mean? Well, when you want to know what something means, you need to start asking questions of the passage. Because remember, there were two boxes we talked about. First century, John is writing to a group of people. What did it mean to them on that day when he wrote it and the scrolls were sent to all the churches in 90 AD? And then a little bit later, we're going to ask ourselves, okay, great. We need to fully understand what it meant, the author's intent. And then what are the timeless principles? What does it mean to us? And so here's some questions that I began. I had a few more as I was studying, but here's just some questions that if you're going to understand about the wedding, here's some questions probably we should address. Why did Jesus launch his movement here? Why in Cana? Why in a Galilee? Why in a village? I mean, he's literally launching his movement. He's got 5 disciples. He's now a rabbi. He now has a following. He does his first miracle. Why would he do it here? Second question is, what are we to make of the conversation with his mother? I read it purposefully in it's a pretty literal translation. It's called the ESV. Woman, what does this have to do with me? It sounds kind of like Jesus and mom are having a little tiff. If you don't understand about the background, so what are we supposed to make of that conversation? Third question would be, what significance is there in these 6 stone jars? What were they used for? Why does the author tell us there's 6 of them? 4, what underlying spiritual implications are we to grasp? If the miracle is a sign and we're supposed to learn something more than, see, there's 2 stories going on. This is what happened, but there's something behind it. What does God want to say about what's it mean? Historically, it happened. It occurred. But he wants the disciples then to learn something about what he's really doing, and he wants the disciples, us now, to learn something significant as well. And then finally, how did this miracle position or launch his ministry with the disciples? Would you like to answer those together? Good, I'm glad. Notice as you look at the passage here, it says on the 3rd day there's a wedding. Let me give you a picture of what a wedding was like. It was the most joyous occasion, especially in a village. Most villages were pretty poor. A wedding could last anywhere from 1 or 2 days to 7 days. The way it would happen is they would have a year-long betrothal period. It was a legal betrothal period that was actually as important as the wedding itself. After a year, the husband, during that year time, he would prepare a place. Women were living in their family, under their father's life and all the rest. And so when the actual day came, then they would take the longest route with torches in the evening, and they would walk all the way through the village so everyone could come. So this huge feast is coming. They would do all the legal documents, and then they would have 7 days, and instead of going on a honeymoon, they literally hung around, especially it was a big wedding, for 7 days, and everyone would bring oil and wine. All the children would get nuts. And it was just like a huge, big party for 7 days. Now, in a culture like this, there's not many of these occasions. This is like the pinnacle of what happens. According to Jewish law, if the girl was a virgin, which was almost always the case in that day, the wedding was to be on Wednesday. And so we can even get some time documentation. You realize, okay, this is when Jesus got the disciples. The wedding has already started. So it's probably middle or late in the week of festivities. When you read the passage carefully, it says Jesus was invited to the wedding. The word invite is singular, okay? Jesus was invited. Have you ever invited someone like to a party and they come with 5 of their friends? Right? This is what happened. We're going to run out of drinks. We're going to run out of chips. We're going to run out of food. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Mary probably is either related or a very, very close friend. And in Eastern culture, there is nothing more humiliating or embarrassing than not to be able to offer hospitality. In fact, lavish hospitality. And so running out of wine is not like, someone run down to the 7-Eleven or the Mini Mart and get... No. Everyone was to bring wine and bring oil. Now, Jesus comes with 5 friends. He's coming near the end, and they're out of stuff. And Mary's is, this is a crisis, because when you run out, the bride and the bridegroom would suffer humiliation and shame in front of the whole village. So it's a big issue. Notice the text said woman. Actually, it wasn't impolite at all. When he says woman, NIV, it says dear woman, because they want to give you the sense. It was a kind expression of respect. And it's an idiomatic expression. What does this have to do with me? It's not harsh. Literally, I wrote down, the literal rendering would be something that goes like this. Your concern and my concern are not the same thing. My hour's not yet come. He'll use that same phrase 5 more times in the book. And then toward the end of the book, remember when he prays, Father, my hour has come. Jesus wants us to know from the very beginning there's a very clear path and a very clear purpose for his life. His mother clearly knows who he is from day one. She knows now, here's the rabbi, he now has a following, fix this problem. Her concern is wine and embarrassment. He said, we're on different pages. My concern, I'm going to launch a movement. I'm going to do my thing, my way, to fulfill my agenda. And so she kind of, whatever he says. And so he says to them, the 6 water jars, they're out of sight. You might wonder, cultural context. If you came to this party, you would have sandals and your feet would be dusty and dirty. These 6 are big jars, about 30 gallons each, 20 to 30 gallons. And they would wash their feet with them. And then later, before you would eat, you would ceremonially wash your hands. And then in between each course, you would wash your hands again. And it was about Jewish purification. It wasn't about germs. They didn't know about germs. It was about this is what you do to be holy. There's 6 jars. Okay? Now, some of you are going to start, it's going to connect. 7 is a word of perfection in Judaism. 6 is a word of unfinished. The 666, all those numbers, it's the number of man. The jars are used for what? External religious rites of that which is unfinished. The water miraculously turns into wine. No, who does he reveal it to? Servants and disciples. The master of the ceremonies were near the end. Now get this. This is really good. It's going to make some of you uncomfortable, but others very, very happy. If a glass is a half a pint, and we go with the low equation, he turns 150 gallons into wine. That's 2,400 glasses of a half pint of the very best wine. This party's going to go on. It's lavish. What's the underline? What's he saying? I'm going to take that which is used for washing off that people think make them holy because of what they do on the outside, and I'm going to lavishly, graciously give them something on the inside. And when you take wine in, joy and wine were synonymous. The rabbis would say, if there is no wine, there is no celebration, there is no life. And it was the picture of prosperity, of joy, and of gladness. And all of that, those disciples are watching. And the spiritual implication is, I'm launching the ministry. The old rituals of the law of Judaism and hypocrisy of where it has ended now is going to be moved out. New life happens internally, and how? Supernaturally. And how does it occur? When Jesus just speaks. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Hebrews 1, and he spoke the world into existence. He speaks, water turns into wine, and who sees it? The servants and the disciples, the lowly people, the man in charge. He's foreshadowing the man in charge. I don't know where this came from. Who gets exalted? The bride. He goes over to the bride and the bridegroom. This is unbelievable. I've been to a lot of weddings, and most people, they watered the wine down a bit in that day for sure, but it was wine. Most people, like day 5 of these celebrations, people are feeling pretty good. By the way, huge disgrace to get drunk. Very against getting drunk. But drinking wine and feeling pretty good, and dancing and laughing and eating and children and music. I mean, this is a 7-day flat-out party, and Jesus says, I come near the end, I didn't bring any, I brought extra guests, and guess what? Whew. And this little couple gets exalted as bringing the very, very best. Now, can anyone think of maybe some implications of if I'm one of his disciples, click, 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 click. 1, it's a miracle. 2, it's wine. It's a wedding. Why did he launch it here? What was God's original heart? What was his intent in the garden? He wanted to be with us. And what was God's heart? What was God's attitude before the fall? And all of us got thinking he was mad at us all the time. And the goal of church was to make you feel guilty. God said, of every tree, lavish, generous, good, kind, providing, joyful, I want the very best for you, with this limitation. So here Jesus comes. Lavishly, what happens? The two become one in marriage. That which is apart come together. Why do they come together? Why do you marry someone? Because this isn't a trick question. You love them. And when you love them and you're together, it brings joy. And out of your love and joy, it normally produces a new life, right? Called a baby. And that baby begins a legacy of relationship. And that relationships produce something called a family. And so he launches his ministry for his disciples to understand that God is good and lavish and gracious. And it's not external and religious and rites and purifications and external, but the living God has come. And what he did to that water, he wants to do inside every human being. And he does it through his word. And there is life and joy and relationship and goodness. And he's restoring. And those disciples' eyes are going click, 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 click. And the Holy Spirit wrote it so that on this day, in this room, at this time, your eyes would go, wow. Click, 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 click. Jesus was laughing at that party. Jesus was dancing at that party. Jesus was belly laughing, and he knew what was going on. Jesus was having a blast. Shocking to some groups, but he was actually having fun. How did this position or launch his ministry with the disciples? Their calling was rooted in the goodness of God. Their calling was rooted in not I ought, I got, I should. This is the Messiah. He has power. And his power is about life and love and joy and relationships. Jesus, unfiltered. Well, he goes down to Capernaum, according to the text, stays there for a few days with his family. We learn a little bit later through the other gospel writers that a lot of them came from that time. You're going to find he's going to go to Jerusalem and he's going to lay down the gauntlet and literally declare that he's the Messiah. And then because of all the hostility in Jerusalem, he does most of his ministry in Galilee and other places. In fact, you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and remember the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they're always coming out to ask him questions or to attack him. He only goes to Jerusalem during these feasts. Now, one of the questions is why is this account different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke's? It's because there were actually 2 times this occurred. And they're very clear and they're very different. What Jesus did, and we're going to see in just a minute, is he goes to the feast, but you can't have the new unless you address the status quo and the old that's been perverted and corrupted. And so the disciples are going to learn at the wedding, this is new life, and it's about grace and joy and love. And then they're going to learn, just like those pots were external religion, so what has happened at the temple is not a right view or heart or connection with the living God. And so he's going to positively say this, and then he's going to lay down the gauntlet, declare, this is my Father's house. We read that and think, well, of course you're Jesus. They didn't know who he was. To go there and declare, this temple is my Father's house, he's claiming to be the Messiah. And then by what authority? He turns over he does this and he does that. And I'll explain why in just a second. Remember what the question is. By what miraculous sign? You're coming in here with authority to say that this place is yours and you are Messiah related to your Father. We want some proof. I want to see your ID, buddy. Where do you get off doing this stuff? And he will say something that they don't understand, religious leaders. The disciples don't understand. But it'll all come back to everyone, he'll realize, because he will always bank everything then and everything now on the proof of this. He rises from the dead. It's the resurrection. So let's go and ask a few questions of the second section. Questions I ask is, why go to the feast in Jerusalem? Second, why is John's account different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke's? Why does Jesus react so passionately and violently at the temple? What are the underlying spiritual implications of this section? They're pretty heavy. How did this event shape Jesus' relationship with the religious leaders, his disciples, and the multitudes? Now, I'm just going to pause. I'm going to keep going in and out. What does it say? We made some observations, right? What does it mean, interpretation? What did I do? I asked some basic questions about the passage that required some historical background that's available to you and me, some logical thinking and reasoning about how does this all fit together, because what we're trying to do is, I want to know exactly when John wrote this in 90 AD, and if I was sitting in a little house church and someone opened that scroll and read it, I want to know what he meant and what they got. Because if I don't get clear about that, I'll go off on some little dilly, devotional, emotional thing. Well, I was reading, and I think this, and I think it means this, and I think it means that. I've been to a lot of Bible studies where it's sort of, let us share our pool of ignorance. What do you think it means? 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 I think it means wine is okay. I think it means jars should not be in the house. I think it... Literally. I say this reverently. I don't care what you think it means. I want to know exactly what the Holy Spirit meant it to them through John. Because until you're clear on what it actually says and what it actually means, you're not ready to apply it to your life. Does that make sense? And by the way, that's how cults and all kind of crazy stuff gets going on. People grab a portion of a passage. Every author who's written any book has a very clear purpose and authorial intent about what he wants to say. Our job is to discover what that is, then apply it to our life. So those are the questions in the second half. So let's do a little interpretation. So why does he go to the temple? He goes to the temple because he's required to. He's been there every year since 12 years old, when he went there with his mom and dad. Why is it different? Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are describing when he cleared the temple at the end of his life, at the very end of his ministry, where he comes back to town, and it's what got him killed. He lays down the gauntlet here early in his ministry. They don't completely get it, but the disciples, now imagine what this is like. You're a good Jewish boy. You follow John the Baptist. You know God's in this. John says, behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. And you start following him. And you listen to him. Then he quotes these passages, and he knows stuff that no one else could know. And then he says, follow me. And so you're following him. And then you go to a wedding. And it's like, oh my lands, this is crazy. This is amazing. What do you think? This is great. And then you go to what you've gone to since you've been a little boy. And you go to this festival, and you walk in, and it's like it's always been. Here's the cows, and there's the sheep, and there's the table, and there's the money changers. And you say, well, why is all that there? If it was done simply for a convenience, actually there wouldn't be a problem. Pilgrims came from all over the world. So I don't want to, I've got a cow, or I've got a sheep, or I've got a goat. I don't want to take this cow or goat 50, 60, 80, 100 miles in my pilgrimage to offer it. So I have some money. I'm going to go, and when I get there, I'm going to buy, if I'm really poor, 2 pigeons or 2 doves. If I'm a little bit more economically up, I'm able to afford a goat or a sheep or something, and I'm going to buy an animal so that I can then take it, and I'm going to sacrifice it because that's what the law says. But here's what was happening. Here's why Jesus is ticked off. Barclay, who's just a master at the research of the ancient times, you could buy a day's wage in our economy of probably 25 years ago. A day's wage would be about 4 pennies. When you came in, you had to pay, every male once a year had to pay a shekel. It's a tax, an annual tax, and the tax was 6 pennies. A day's wage was 4 pennies. Well, if you had a different kind of money and you had to pay this tax, you would get your money changed. Like if you've traveled overseas, anybody, right? You can where do you want to get your money changed? Like at the very nice, expensive hotel? Right? And they say, oh yeah, we'll change your money. And it's 2.8 per dollar when you go to the exchange. And at the hotel, they just take 10% of whatever. And you go, what? So they were charging for every shekel 1 extra penny. It's just robbery. You could buy 2 pigeons or doves outside the temple area for about 4 pennies. Historically, there's documents inside the temple area, it might cost you 75 pennies. And if you were really poor and couldn't pay, you might have to give your cloak as collateral. So, okay, here's what I want you to get. I want you to picture this. Jesus comes in, and the ministry has started. And he sees all these animals, and he sees all these poor people, and they're getting ripped off. I mean, ripped off by these interest rates. And they have different kinds of money, so they have to have the temple shekel. And then he's watching these guys with the animals. And he's realizing, I mean, they are getting ripped off. And his righteous anger explodes. And he literally just finds what he can, bam. And I mean, please don't get this milk toasted down. I bet you should leave now. You should leave now. He was a carpenter, and he was a physical man, and I would guess fairly athletic. And the tables flipped, the coins flew, the chickens flew, and people were running. And our God was mad. And he was mad for good reason. Because what was created to be a place of worship had become nothing more than a prostitution for financial gain. Can anyone remotely think of any parallels in our day? And so the disciples learn, very exciting guy to follow, but as a good Jewish boy, we were in good standing with the spiritual leadership. Now Jesus and the spiritual leaders are at odds. That means we have to choose between cultural, political correct standing or standing with Jesus, because you can't have it both ways. The multitudes, after it, he does these miracles. They don't tell us how many, but he does multiple miracles. And the people believe, but it's a belief, they believe he's a miracle worker. And it says Jesus doesn't entrust, he knows their hearts. They're believing yes, this is amazing, we get the declaration, but they're believing on the basis of what can you do for me? And what John is going to do is walk us through a process of intellectually believing, and then believing deeper, more on what you see, and then moving to the point where you're entrusting and genuinely following, where he's your Savior and he's your Lord. Does it make sense? That's what it meant then, and that's what it means now. Now flip the page and let's ask ourselves, what does John chapter 2 mean to you and to me? What does it mean to you and to me? Number one, Jesus wants to do good to me. He wants to do good to me. That's verses 1 through 5. That's what you see. I gave you a cross-reference there that I'll quote in a minute. He could have started the ministry anywhere. He wants you to know that what our first parents had in the garden, he launched the ministry to know, I came to bring life, and life abundant and good. And it was at a wedding. Probably the second, I don't want to get in trouble with all my other kids. Got to be careful here. The greatest day in my life, apart from coming to Christ, was the day I married Teresa. The second greatest day experientially was probably my daughter's wedding. Because when your boys get married, the other family kind of, they're in charge of what happens, and you get to do the rehearsal dinner. And when your daughter gets married, you get 2 great things. You get to pay for it, number 1, but you get to say what's going to happen. And I'm going to tell you, I just remember dancing with Annie and laughing and friends and food. And and walking her down the aisle and seeing her friends and our friends. And it was just like, this is awesome. Some of you actually would probably have been embarrassed. Is that our pastor? Yeah, is he dancing? You better believe. And I had a blast. Just had a blast. It was like, oh God, this is so precious. I don't know where you're struggling in trusting him for the future, or about a decision, or about a relationship, or about your money, or about your job, or about your kids. But let me tell you one thing. Jesus came to do good for you. He's for you. He's a sun and a shield. He gives grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly. You get that from here to here, it'll change everything about how you relate to Jesus. You'll actually want to talk to him. You'll want to hang out. You want to do stuff with him and for him. Second, Jesus came to transform my life from the inside out by a supernatural miracle, not by external religious rituals. We got that from verses 6 through 10, right? Coming to church, giving to United Way, trying to be a good little goody two-shoes person. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. That's not the gospel. He came to transform you from the inside out. I grew up in a church that was like the 6 jars of external performance and religious activities that were devoid of a relationship with God. And by God's grace, some people who understood life and goodness explained to me the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I trusted him, and he changed me from the inside out. And I didn't try to stop cussing. All I can tell you is I read the Bible every morning and every night. I hid it because my parents think I was flipping out, you know. But as I was reading it, something happened and my tongue changed. And I kept reading it, my attitudes changed. And I kept reading it and I got around other people and joy filled my heart. And that's normal. That's what God wants. It's not about ought, should, got to. It's a transformation from the inside out. Third is I must follow him and believe in him to see his glory and continue his movement. He started a movement. If any man is in Christ, you're a new creature. The old things pass away, everything becomes new. That's the transformation in 2 Corinthians 5:17. But then my responsibility is not to, I made a decision or I prayed a prayer. I follow and believe. I follow and believe he manifests his glory. In other words, you see what he's really like. He does things in your life. It's powerful. It's amazing. It's great. And you know what? It's scary. And it never ends. You know how mature you are. And you start with baby steps and, I'm gonna tell someone out loud that I'm a follower of Jesus. And you do, and wow, that wasn't so bad. And then you begin to You reach out and you help someone and something happens through you. And then pretty soon you say, I'm going to believe him for my finances. And then I'm going to believe him for my time and then for my future. And each step, follow, believe, mess up. Right? Because you're human. Follow, believe, mess up. And then when you mess up, it's not like, you dirty, rotten, little, terrible follower. What's wrong with you? I knew you. I don't know where we got that. That's just not the God of the Bible. Who's Jesus? When you really, really mess up and you run back, his arms are open. Put on the best robe. Put sandals on his feet. Put a ring on his or her finger. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to make mistakes. Does he take it lightly? Of course not. If we stay there long enough, there's consequences that are painful. But the pain of the consequences is so you come. Every step of the way, you follow and believe. When you stop following, and the reason you stop following is what you're saying to God is, I don't trust you. I don't trust you in this relationship. I don't trust you in this business deal. I don't trust you for my future. So you stop, you know what? You stop believing. Stop believing, you stop growing. Stop experiencing him. And then he'll bring circumstance, people, message, boom, boom. All because he loves you. He loves you. And and the moment you break through, bam. This is the Christian life. John's going to show us what it looks like to follow this Jesus in real time. Fourth, my body is his temple. And today he demands authentic worship from me 24/7. Jesus said about this temple, this is my Father's house. Where does God dwell now? Romans 12:1-2. Offer your body as a living sacrifice. 1 Corinthians 6. Do you not know that your body is the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you? Your body, your hands, where your eyes go, where your feet go, what captivates your heart. Your body is God's temple. Jesus today would walk in and say, what are you doing with my Father's body? Why are you looking at that stuff? What are you doing putting that stuff in my body? What are you doing working yourself to death and not getting enough rest? Why aren't you enjoying me more? And he would clear the temple. Why? Because he's radical. Because he's a revolutionary. He didn't come to earth to make a lot of little nice people that show up to meetings and watch people talk and sing a couple songs. He started a movement that he's entrusted to us. What did he say? Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. God, the expectation for your work and your home and your neighborhood, God's expectation is the only hope is you. Angels aren't showing up at your house going, well, we're going to take care of all this. He lives in you if you're a follower. And so the response is to surrender and to follow and say, Lord, help me. And he will. Finally, I can trust him and his word because he rose from the dead. We're going to come back to this, back to this, back to this, back to this, back to this. But here's what I can tell you. You can trust the future. He made promises. He rose from the dead. I mean, when he starts the ministry, hey, where do you get the authority to do all this stuff? Who do you think you are? Knock down this temple and I'll raise it in 3 days. They thought it was the physical temple. He meant his body. And for you and me and every believer in Jesus Christ, with every step where you're afraid, I'll keep my promise because you can trust that I am the only one who died and I paid for sin and I conquered sin and I rose from the dead. And you can bank on that. I'll be faithful to you. I will never, ever, ever leave you or forsake you or let you down.